We're here today to meet Jason Marks. Jason is the co-founder and CEO of Telo Trucks. And Telo Trucks is the maker of the world's most efficient electric vehicle and mini truck. So we know it's all started with you, Jason, feeling that there was no good solution to park and visit downtown San Francisco, but also go on adventures. You'll tell us all about that origin story. But you also didn't start on your own. You started with one of your longtime friends, Forrest North, who was expert in EV batteries. So all of this makes a lot of sense. And you were ready to just bring this technology to market. The first one was a Telo MT1. We have new numbers because it's really hard to keep up with you. Since the launch in June 2023, you raised 8.1 million in VC funding, but have now over 5,000 pre-orders, equivalent of 250 million in consumer-generated revenue. Kudos for that. And we definitely will discuss how you got all this community of fans before we can even get the hand on the truck. And prior to co-founding Telo, you led the autonomous vehicles and driver assistance system test programs at National Instruments, and you also developed test systems for 5 major US automakers' autonomy. So a lot of experience in that space. And you graduated from Columbia University and you live in San Francisco, as we inferred. Welcome, Jason.
That's right.
It's such a pleasure to have you today. Before we dive in, I wanted to show a few photos for people to can really imagine what Telo is about. So maybe I'll let you do a bit of voiceover while I share the pictures.
Sure. So we're an electric mini truck, which really is a pickup truck with the same utility, payload, personnel capacity as a mid-sized work truck at the length and width of a 2-door Mini Cooper. So inspired largely by Japanese mini trucks, but taken to the US market to try to serve a very specific niche for pickup trucks in downtown cities. And you might think it sounds like an oxymoron, who drives pickup trucks in downtown cities. Well, there's actually 3 million new pickup trucks registered in downtown cities, new registrations every single year. And about a third of those are people like me that like to go to the mountains on the weekends. Maybe they have a 150-pound dog they take to Fort Funston on the weekend, but they live in a downtown condo building in San Francisco. But about 2/3 of them are people that do work in downtown cities, like construction workers, people that work in services and maintenance and waste. And we see that the same problem holds true, is that trucks have gotten outrageously large and they don't actually do the jobs that they can do because they can't fit in a downtown city.
Awesome. And I know this is one of the overview of all the colors for the truck. Let's look at a few things. I think this photo was just so impressive to me to realize the footprint. Can you say more about the design?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, the kind of genesis of Telo Trucks was that I have a 150-pound dog who I take to the beach on the weekends. But I live in downtown San Francisco. And so I have a truck with a cap on it so I can throw him in the back of the truck, because he's definitely not going to the back of my SUV or sedan after he gets all sandy at the beach. But I love to eat in downtown San Francisco. I think San Francisco has some of the best food. I saw one of the comments I think San Francisco has some of the best food in the world. And I love to go eat at restaurants there. I never park outside of any restaurants. I circle the block for hours on end. And I was like, hey, why don't small pickup trucks exist anymore? They used to exist back in the 90s and early 2000s, and stumbled across the reason why they didn't exist. A bunch of legislature that was created that really incentivized automakers to build bigger vehicles, largely driven by the fact that the Environmental Protection Agency caved a bit to automakers' demands and gave them a loophole, which means that if they built their vehicle bigger, they didn't have to meet such strict emissions regulations. So that was one loophole that was jumped through. The other one being crash safety. People kind of throw a bigger hood at a vehicle thinking it's always going to be safer if we just throw a longer hood. And when in reality, I know I've been working in safety my whole career for automotive. That's not the case. That's not how safety actually ends up working. So I realized that I had a unique insight that I could solve both these problems with my background in safety, my co-founder and longtime friend Forrest's background in efficiency, battery technology, and EVs. And we could actually fix the problem that small trucks didn't exist anymore. So we cut off the 4-foot long hood of the vehicle. We made it 14 inches, which was the required amount to be 5-star crash test rating. We optimized for the packaging of the entirety of the vehicle, given that there was no engine. We could rearrange a lot of things in the vehicle and how the occupants sit and how they interact with the rest of the vehicle. cut off a lot of the superfluous nature of the vehicle, and we ended up with something that had the same utility as my uh, fourth generation Tacoma, but in this tiny little footprint.
This is amazing. Yeah, you can see the front without when you have a electric engine, you don't need so much space in the front. Just eye candy how you can go from city to adventures. I have to see this for really dreamy photos. So I want to be here on this campsite. That looks really awesome. And a few more adventures. So you can really bring your whole family biking in the mountain. That sounds really awesome. And yeah, your co-founders, maybe we want to say just a quick word about the founding team.
Yeah, so Forrest, the gentleman on my right hand side, your left hand side. Yeah, thank you. So Forrest and I actually pole vaulted at the same high school in Washington State, albeit a few years apart. And we kind of got reunited by a mutual friend back in the late 2010s. We were both working on micromobility side projects at the time, trying to fix the problem of city transportation. We both had theses around that, and realized we were both kind of approaching this from an angle that may not be widely accepted. Like one of the big things I tell a lot of people that are starting in the mobility space or any space that's related to climate is that you got to find a challenge that customers really, really want, they're clamoring for. And we both kind of had a thesis that this is what I would want, but we didn't talk to enough people and figure out what they really wanted. So one weekend we were working in this shop together in 2022 on separate projects, and we're like, we should really just ask a bunch of people what would be to make the biggest difference for city transportation for them. So we spent the weekend going around to Los Angeles, San Francisco, interviewing hundreds of people and asking, if I gave you the opportunity to kind of rethink the footprint and form factor of any vehicle that exists today, what vehicle would you actually clamor towards? And 89% of them said, I just want a small truck. That's all I want. And so we realized we had this like little niche, and we've been thinking about it for a long time, and we kind of jumped full speed ahead. And this was in April of 2022. And one of the first things we did is we realized, okay, we have the technical expertise to go do this. Like we have the safety background, we have the automotive background. Forrest was on the original Tesla battery team. He was on the Stanford solar car team with JB Strobel that turned into Tesla. You know, like we had the chops to do this from a technical perspective, but in order to build something that everyone really wants to make a great product, we needed to have a visual aspect of the vehicle that was really alluring. You know, both consumers and even commercial customers want to believe that they're driving around in something they really love. So one of the first calls we made was to Yves Bahar. And Forrest has known Yves since the like 2008-ish when he launched Mission Motors together, which was one of the first electric motorcycle companies, with Yves Bahar over at TED, back in the good old days of TED. And called up Yves. We said, hey, we got this idea. We want to build an electric mini truck. We've developed a technology that lets us package 5 people, a 5-foot bed, into the length and width of a 2-door Mini Cooper. And he goes, whoa, what? That doesn't make any sense, but I love it. I'm in. Let's do it. And he jumped in full speed. And Yves, in his own right, is one of the world's most legendary designers. He did the Herman Miller chairs, One Laptop Per Child, Jawbone, Mini Cooper, the initial relaunch, and I can't even hundreds of other products. But he was enthusiastic about this project and said, "Hey, I drive a Rivian. I love my Rivian. It's just a little big for me, and I really want to kind of rethink the way we do mobility in the U.S."
It's so impressive. First, I know Yves' background is just tremendous. So love that you led with design and desire, and that's something we talk a lot in this series. It's about how do we create solutions that are better for the climate, but are just desirable, a little bit like Tesla started. It was also interesting that you got this clarity from your early customer interviews. I was just looking at this Inc. magazine, and their recent article, it's just the title was surprising to me, like how tiny trucks became those magnet rivals to giant pickup. Because I feel like everything has been expanding and growing bigger. So you're probably tapping into something that's really changing how we think about the environment. I'm gonna stop sharing and still, I know you had all this background and people coming from the industry, but it's a pretty bold move to start an EV company today. There's a lot of challenges. Can you tell us a bit more about these challenges and how you address them over time?
Yeah, I like to say that there's a graveyard of electric vehicle companies that came before us, right? We've seen that happen. Even just a few weeks ago, we saw Canoe file for bankruptcy. So we've certainly seen our fair share of challenges in this space. And with the political climate, kind of telling you people don't want EVs. We've also seen a lot of the headwinds in this space. But the reality is we can point to why a lot of the EV companies ultimately didn't make it through, the ones that didn't make it. And a lot of them have a very similar story of trying to get to high volume manufacturing without having a strong customer base and strong economics. So like the market and the economics have to come first when building an EV company. And there was almost so much pressure at the time. They were raising hundreds of millions of dollars, $1 billion to just go fast, get up to Tesla speed, that you make so many mistakes along that way. So, but from that graveyard of electric vehicles, out of those ashes came a bunch of really, really cool stuff that kind of enabled us to do what we do. So it wouldn't have been possible for us to build an electric vehicle profitably at low volumes or build a customer base that's really clamoring for this without those things to come before. And really, I point to three major things that we've really kind of capitalized on from those last few years. One is commoditized components. If you talk to, so Mark Tarpenning is the founder of Tesla, an investor in our company, sits on our board. Same, and Martin Eberhard, the other founder of Tesla, is also an investor in the company. But Mark, we talk to all the time. And Mark, he tells us the stories about how in the early days of Tesla, they had to build their own inverters that really controlled the power of the vehicle. And they were the size of a dining room table. It cost tens of millions of dollars to do. It took years of effort to get this thing ready to go. And today I can go to a supplier and I can buy an inverter with the same amount of power that fits in the palm of my hands and costs less than $1,000. So it's wild what kind of has become commoditized over time, especially with the scale up of EVs. The second big thing is software has gotten incredible, and software for not just developing a vehicle, but also for validating a vehicle. We like to use the term 100% virtual validation, as in you can almost build and validate your vehicle entirely in software before you have to actually create something physical. And that greatly reduces time and cost in actually developing a vehicle. So the example I'll give you is a very simple to understand one. For testing the aerodynamics and improving the aerodynamics of your vehicle, the way that it worked in the past was you would build these full-scale models. You would put them you'd rent out a wind tunnel at NASA Ames or some other place that had a big old wind tunnel. And then you would run these for weeks at a time and you would make little modifications. You would test them, modifications. This costs millions of dollars to do. It's a very, very expensive process to just optimize the aerodynamics just a little bit on your vehicle. These days, we can load a 3D model into software without any engineers touching the thing, just two designers over 1 month of time, and an AI tool that built in this software can push and pull on the surfaces of the vehicle and optimize the shape to get the best performing aerodynamic possible. So we saw a 20% improvement in the aerodynamic coefficient of drag from the images you showed to what's actually going to go in the vehicles that get released here in a month. Like 20% improvement, two designers, 1 month of time, just software tools. Incredible kind of experience. And the third big thing is contract manufacturing, specifically domestic contract manufacturing. We saw a massive scale up of Chinese EV capability over the last 25 years. Like they went from nothing to the most predominant vehicle maker in the world. Like 73% of all vehicle EVs are made from China right now. In fact, I think more Chinese EVs will sold in Germany than all German cars together. So it's incredible how much has kind of scaled in the Chinese space. But we've learned that it's possible to build quickly and to do so in a way that has one facility that can build multiple different companies' vehicles all at once. And those are being brought up in the US, and they only recently have been brought up. So we're working with a low volume manufacturer right now that does that for dozens of companies, like all of the names that we would know. That's Aria Group. That's the one we've been very public about. And then as we scale to larger volumes, we'll work with domestic manufacturers that can do so at even larger volumes.
Got it. Oh, so Aria Group is a partnership more for the lower end volume, and then you have Pass for Scale.
Yep, exactly.
Very cool. Can you tell us a little bit about the battery? Because we know usually batteries are the big component from a cost perspective in an EV. What was your approach for Telo Trucks?
Yeah, so the battery is the heart and soul of the electric vehicle. Like everything the vehicle does is dependent on the battery, your range, your performance, your vehicle kinematics and dynamics, how it drives on the road. And just like the overall, experience with purchasing the vehicle, it's all based on battery specs, not anything else, other specs. So we knew that we had to and it's also the most expensive part of the vehicle by a good amount. It's about 20 to 25% of the actual cost of the vehicle itself. So we knew that since we had the expertise to build battery packs, and we knew that it was going to define how our vehicle was, we had to own the battery development ourselves. So we build our own battery packs in-house. It's the only thing we don't contract manufacture and will never contract manufacture. We build the battery pack from cell to pack ourselves. And our core innovation in the battery space is that our battery pack is 50% more space efficient than even Tesla's battery pack. And we can do this because we're not trying to go 0 to 60 in sub 2 seconds. We're trying to optimize for a big battery pack that can draw just enough power to get you to performance in the truck world. But 500 horsepower is plenty. 0 to 60 in 4 seconds is plenty for most people. But it has some major advantages, and we don't have to deal with nearly as much thermal management and nearly as much electrical current going through the system. That lets us really shrink the battery and optimize for that specific nature. So we developed technology, we patented that technology to get us the smallest physical form of a battery that uses cylindrical cells, I think, that exists in the automotive space.
Super impressive. And I think it also goes back to the use cases, right? If you have your bike in the back, it's not about going so quickly that you're going to lose all your shipments.
Exactly.
By the way, I wanted to ask about use cases. You say you talk to a lot of people, but how did you define the ideal customer? Because you wanted the urban use case, but also the adventure use case. How did that influence the design eventually?
Yeah, our ideal customer has changed dramatically over time. And what we kind of did was we wanted our process of developing this vehicle to be very open source in many ways. So we have a Discord channel that has nearly 3,000 members. And that Discord channel is very vocal about the things they want, the reasons they're going to use the vehicle. In fact, you can't actually participate in the Discord channel unless you introduce yourself and say how you would use the vehicle. So our actually understanding of our customer base has changed dramatically over time as every single person tells us why they're going to use the vehicle. So it's incredible, like the amount of data you can actually get while you're developing a vehicle to be like, oh, what really matters is a 110-volt outlet in the back. Oh, what really matters is having heating and cooling actually in a covered bed. Like these are things that kind of define how you think about the vehicle and how you think about the use case. What's really interesting is when you look at our demographics across the board, it's kind of still fundamentally what you'd expect. It's the top 10 cities in the US. It's generally people that are between 25 and 45 years old. It's about 2/3 male, 1/3 female, kind of self-selecting. And so it really is, the urban adventurer's vehicle. But at the same time, there's things about that vehicle that are unique to that particular group of people. Things like security really matter to them. Like, you need to have a locking mechanism for some type of storage. Like that's why we have a locking gear tunnel that lets us put stuff in and lock and keys out of sight, because it's really important for people who live in downtown cities to not have exposed things in their bed or in their vehicle.
So I know we have some product managers on the call, and I can imagine them like, oh my God, there's a Discord channel with people putting their wish list. How do you sort through that? Anything you tell us about how you do product management? Because it must be pretty complex.
Yeah, we actually have a fun way of doing that. So we actually have a Discord CRM, which we use emojis to tag certain things. And only when people on the Telo team use those emojis, they actually get logged to certain things in our Discord CRM. So it's like product feedback or like engineering feedback or like high priority engineering feedback that actually gets fed into our product chain. So we have mechanisms in which to actually highlight different things we want to make sure we save, because Discord happens so fast, and it just scrolls through, and 1 week later you lose, you don't remember what you were looking for. So just having a nice little kind of tag, remember that this falls into this category. It gets logged into our CRM. And if it's high priority enough, it gets put in our product management chain. We can actually action on it.
Wow. Management by emojis. First time I hear that. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
It's very insightful. Well, talking about how the team functions, I'm curious, you have a lot of advisors, you named people like Eve and some of your investors, but I think what we've seen with early stage startups, it's this ability to create the surrounding of people who can help them move faster. And as a marketing advisor, I see that all the time, but I'm curious how you bring these external impact and influences and how you make that the core of the business. And if it's been challenging sometimes to have so many opinionated probably and smart advisors, how you deal with that.
Yeah, I think that the vision has to be yours and yours alone. And you have to make sure that you are driving that vision. You can always take advice, but fundamentally you have to believe that you're doing this for a reason. The reason exists, and you're going to drive that with all your energy. So like whenever there's, for example, like we have a number of people that have done a lot of things before. So Andy Palmer was the ex-COO at Nissan, ex-CEO at Aston Martin. He's an advisor we talk to weekly. Simon Spruill is the ex-CMO at Aston Martin, ex-CMO at Fisker. We talk to him daily. Mark Tarpening, I text all the time. Martin, I talk to at least once a month. Like we have this incredible group of people on our team that have built vehicles, built startups, built incredible things. And what the number one thing I asked them, instead of saying, what would you do in this scenario, is tell me about a time where you encountered this at this company. What did you do to solve that problem? So instead of trying to get a direct feedback on your example, just give them an example, like give them to come up with a story to tell about how when they experienced it and how they thought about the problem. And one of the best things that does is it gives you stories to tell other people. Like, hey, Aston Martin figured this out. Tesla figured this out. Nissan figured this out. Fisker had this problem, and here's why this was a challenge. Like it gives you all those tidbits to know, so you can pull them out and say, like, yeah, you might think this, but here's the reality, and here's what happened in those situations.
Oh, I love that. I feel like culture, especially early stage, comes from a lot of the stories people tell internally. So it's a super smart way to engage. Anything that you find difficult in the whole process of getting the company off the ground?
Yeah, I think that, and I think a lot of people probably on this call can feel the same way, maybe feels the same way, but Forrest and I are diehard engineers first and foremost. And one of the biggest challenges is to step out of the engineering space and think of a lot of other things going on in the world of building a company. And I don't mean just like fundraising, the sales, the marketing, but things like understanding that you're not the expert in design, and like that like kind of giving that away to have somebody else make those decisions. Like that's a very hard thing to do because like you're building your baby and you're actually like engineering a lot of it. So like to like let somebody else make a design decision that has engineering downstream implications is a very, very hard thing to let go of. And it's contentious thing to let go of. You're like, why do I need like that thing to pop out and be a phone charger? Like, no, it's not a good, it's too not structurally sound enough. It's not going to work. Like, oh, no, we'll figure it out. Like, so a lot of things like that end up happening and almost turning the engineering mind off and be like, look, what's the fundamental goal we're trying to do? We're trying to bring a mini truck to market that everyone loves. So we've got to really trust in the process to do that.
I would love for you to touch about fundraising. Obviously, we don't know what 2025 is going to be about. There's a lot of changes. What's been your approach so far? And can you tell us more about your investors?
Yeah. So I think that for those of you that are early stage founders and probably all encountered this before, but fundraising is the most challenging part of being a founder. And it's also the part that you can really grow the most in. Um, I think that, but you can treat fundraising like an engineering challenge where you put in incremental bits of effort and you get incrementally better. And at a certain point, you pass a threshold that somebody bites. So for me, when I raised our pre-seed fund, it was our friends and family fund, which was, just over $1.5 million. A lot of that just simply came from, hey, I'm in the automotive space, forced in the automotive space. We got a great team. We're going to figure this out. You've seen us be successful in our past careers. Give us some money. That's easy to get a 25K check from something like that. When you go to the institutional investors as the next phase, that's where things really start to get challenging. And at the seed stage of a company, when you're raising between, let's say, $2 to $5 million or $10 million in that range at that seed stage company, there is a group of like 1,000 investors available to you. And so it's impossible to weed out who's good, who's bad, who's writing checks, who's not writing checks. And you just my biggest advice is just get the reps in. Like you will get better. You will understand what people think. And you will know if you truly believe in what you're doing. Because when you get told no 100 times, you have to have a come to Jesus moment where you're like, do I really believe this? Why do I believe this? That's the first thing. So persistence is key. The second thing I would say is fundraising is really about storytelling. It's like you really have to be able to, one, tell the story of yourself. Like, how do you introduce yourself? When I introduce myself, I say, hey, I'm Jason. I built my first vehicle from scratch when I was 14. I used to dress as Henry Ford in elementary school. This is my life work. This is what I want to do. I want to be remembered as someone that changed the history of transportation. I built the safety systems that went into the first two EV pickup trucks. This is what I want to do. And when I introduced my co-founder, I go, Forrest was on the Stanford Solar Car team with JB Strobel that turned into Tesla. He built a battery pack for the very first Roadster. Like very succinct, easy to understand. Like these guys know what they're doing. Um, when you introduce your company and what you're doing, like that's also very good. You need to have that 30-second clip of like, hey, we built electric mini trucks, the work trucks, delivery vans, utility vehicles that will power tomorrow's city. In the future, cities are going to work. It's going to be because of us. Like you need to really have those punchy things down and be able to kind of pull them out of your hat when necessary. And then one thing that, you have to figure out what works for you. For me, I can't sit here and just recite something that would sound like big and bold and incredible, like can't be a Steve Jobs character. That's just not who I am. And so I can't fundamentally do that. But what I can do is tell stories. So I go, hey, this might sound crazy. We're building an EV company. EV companies have failed. There's really two reasons not to invest in an EV company. One is the market. Two is the economics. Like, does anybody actually want this thing? I've heard they don't. And economics, no one's been able to actually do this profitably. But let me tell you why I'm different. I'm going to tell you with a couple of stories. I'll start with my customers. Let me tell you about a customer. I'll tell you about a customer. This is why this matters to them. So that mechanism works for me a lot better. So you kind of have to find what mechanism of this delivery works best and gets people engaged.
It's a masterclass, Jason. I love that. Thank you for sharing. And I have a question because we discussed last episode, Mark was telling us how he's also vetting VCs. And we heard a lot of people even turning down significant checks because of the fit. Like, how do you evaluate who's the right fit for you as an investor and what kind of expectation do you have from the relationship?
Yeah, I mean, we got, I want to say lucky, but also pursued people that were, I think, really good fits for us. Out of the gates. But once you have a group of VCs that are like on your cap table, it becomes a little easier because you talk to them, say, who do you like? Who is this? Like, who would you not want to work with? And you really get an understanding of like, what intro path can I go through to get to these people? So that's easy. It's like the seed stage that's really hard is like, because there's so many available to you. There's so many people that can write a 500K check. There is no shortage of VCs that can write a 500K check. And that's where it gets really challenging. And that's up to you. It's like you should always ask questions. Like you should always ask, what's a normal deal for you? Like, what is your sweet spot? Like, what kind of participation do you have after the round? Like, what do you like to do as a VC that really encourages what we're doing? How will you help us in the future raise our Series A? Those are the questions you need to be asking. And then, when you should back channel, once you start to feel like you're in the process, like back channel a little bit, talk to other people that have raised from them, call them on the phone. Would you take the money from these people again? I get a lot of calls from actually people that are also in their seed stage raising money that have gotten offers from companies that have VCs that have given us money and said, hey, what did you think about them? And every time I'm like, hey, let me tell you a story about what they did to help me. And I'm sure they would do the same thing for you. Like I get a call about our very first institutional investor, Go Ahead Ventures. They made an offer, a little bit ago, and the founder called me up and said, "Hey, would you take money from them?" I said, "They came to my wedding." The thing you should always ask is, "What's your investment thesis?" That's a really important question to ask. Why do you invest money? And if the answer is is for the financial return, then probably not a good fit for you. But if it's for like this is the fundamental mission of the venture fund. We obviously want to return financials here, but here's the mission that we're going after, and all of our investments are around that mission, then it's a good fit, and I mean, potentially a good fit. And there's no shortage of climate funds that are really enthusiastically investing.
Yeah. So your outlook for 2025, still optimistic about fundraising, or do you have any recommendation for people? Because I think at the highest level, I was wondering how you think about the new administration reshaping incentives or policy, and how do you prepare for that potentially?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll tell you how I personally kind of look at this. I think that especially being in a space that's heavily politicized, climate and electric vehicles, like that's a double-edged sword. So one thing that we mentioned in the beginning is build something that everyone actually really loves and wants. And I think that too often times we see a lot of EV companies that came out and they built a Me Too EV company. Everybody has a generic EV crossover. Everybody has a pickup truck that just looks like a truck. It's an EV cup. Everybody has the Tesla Model S lookalike sedan, right? We're first and foremost a mini truck company. Like we are building a mini truck. It turns out that the only way to do this is for it to be electric. So if you want a mini truck, if you think that a mini truck is going to make your life better, then you're going to look past the fact that I may have preconceived notions about electric and say, hey, is this actually going to make my life better? Let me take a deeper dive. Oh, so I'll have to learn how to charge. Okay, that's a new skill I have to learn. Is that worth the benefit I get from getting a mini truck? And that's really the angle we want to take heavily. Like, this is a class of vehicles you don't have available to you, you've never seen before, that you really want. Is it, if you're on the fence about EVs, is it an angle you would take? And the grand scheme of things, I think that's how all, climate solutions should be looked at. Like, here is a new class of product that is going to make your life better. Perhaps there's some trade-offs you'll have to make in order to go to that product, but ultimately those trade-offs will be worth it, not because you think you're doing better for the environment, because it makes your life better.
I love that. It's definitely a recurring theme. But I can imagine also early adopters would still be worried with a mini truck and the use cases of outdoor, like what's the range? I don't think we discussed it. What's the plan range for the truck?
350 miles.
I know you mentioned that you're an engineer and that was coming more naturally for you, but I also see you a lot on LinkedIn. So I wanted to understand a bit more how you're thinking about building the brands, and also what are your early marketing tactics? Because the Discord community is absolutely awesome. We talked about that. But curious to hear, what else are you investing in that early stage in the company before the official launch of the product? So can you tell us more?
Yeah. And I'm certainly no expert in this space. And then, like, I have even help on the call with me right now, like my comms lead. So like I really struggle with this. I think a lot of technical founders do struggle with this. But the trick is to surround yourself with people that are, one, they've done it before, and two, are super enthusiastic about what you're doing. Because like, one of the things is the mistakes I see a lot of founders make is they bring in some expert in marketing or comms, but they don't love your product. They just are good marketers. So maybe they're successful, maybe you're not. What happens when you get somebody that absolutely is in love with your product and they're a good marketer and they've got like a network of people that they can expand on and call upon, it just makes it a whole different ballgame. And the burden of marketing doesn't necessarily fall squarely on you to make happen. So what we do is we keep a calendar-based view. We say, hey, here's the major milestones and things we want to announce. Here's the things we want to do around those announcements. Here's the goals, the metrics associated with those announcements we want to hit. Like, our big goal was to hit 5,000 pre-orders before our March reveal of our vehicle. And we've done that. Like, that was like the fundamental thing, like we tried to do. And we started this when we only had 2,000 pre-orders. So like that was like the stage, like, this is the one pie in the sky. Everything we do is to get to that goal. So like, everything we've done is to try to get to each of those goals, and things have happened along the way that have been serendipitous. Like, we get some YouTuber that's got a big following to just do something about us, and like, oh my gosh, like, we didn't expect that. It just came out of nowhere. There's 100 pre-orders like that day. But some of them have been very planned, like the announcement with Aptera, like the announcement with the configurator and the new design of our vehicle, and the upcoming announcement of our commercial customers. Like, these are things that we've planned and kept strategized on.
Very cool. Yeah, from 2,000 to 5,000, you've been moving really, really fast.
Just wait till March coming up. That's going to be the big one for us.
So what's the next step of the go-to-market? So you're launching officially the product. When is the first availability?
Yeah, so what I want to be clear on is, like, the March reveal of our vehicle is, these are still engineering prototypes. They will look and feel like full vehicles. Like, fundamentally, you won't be able to tell that they're not prototypes, but they still are very much prototypes. So in the automotive design world, we have the concept of first article prototypes and like EP prototypes, design validation prototypes, production prototypes, and then your first production vehicles. We're kind of jumping a couple of those gaps a little bit. We're going from first article prototypes, which we did in 2023, 2024. Now we're doing our engineering prototypes, which are really a mix of design and engineering validation prototypes, because they have all the components to it. These will be on the road driving vehicles. They won't be necessarily highway legal quite yet, because they are, just prototypes. Then the next batch of vehicles will really be production intent. This will not use the tooling that will actually make high volume vehicles. It'll be hands built in many ways, but all of the components that we build on the vehicle will be able to be crash tested safely, representative of the actual tooling of the vehicle. And that will be kind of the start. When that's concluded, that's the start of production. So that's when we kick off production. And that start of production will be the vehicles that get delivered to our customers.
This group is really hoping maybe we can see one Telo Trucks at SF Climate Week. So just saying.
Not sure it's too far-fetched. It's not that far-fetched. If you're at the 22nd floor, though, we might not be able to get it up the elevators.
Well, I'm sure it can park downstairs. It's a small footprint after
Yeah,
all.
we certainly could.
As I said, as an introduction, many people on this call are either just starting in climate, curious about climate. We know there's been a lot of changes in the tech world, especially here in Silicon Valley, and people looking for the next step. So what would be your advice for someone considering tech? How do you get started? What even resources have been helpful to you when you were considering a change?
Yeah, I think that the first thing, and I don't want to kind of give away the secret we have, but the thing you want to do is make sure that whatever you go pursue, that you're passionate about it, because passion shows through. And passion shows through in many, many ways, like not just like staying up late night to finish what you're doing, but we have a rule at Telo that we don't even hire you unless you offer up that you believe you're building your future vehicle. So like we won't even even ask the question. You have to offer that information up, and then we can even consider the hire, because having that amount of passion and drive really is what encourages you through the tough times, especially in early stage startups, especially when you get climate and political headwinds that might kind of put you down a little bit, and it keeps you kind of grounded in many ways, because it's like, oh man, there's a lot of people that are at work right now doing what they hate, and I'm doing what I love. So it's I think that's the most important piece of it. Um, it's cliche, but you have one life here, so you might as well do something you love doing it while you're here. So that was the first thing. And, it really took me, I've been working in industry for over a decade before I started Telo, to really kind of make the jump. And I wish I made the jump a little earlier, because I think I would have kind of had a lot more momentum in my 20s and the energy in my 20s to go and pursue some of these things at full speed ahead. I see some of the ways that some of my engineers and team and operations team operate as as late 20-year-olds. And I was like, oh man, if I had that kind of energy, I feel like I'd get twice the amount of things done.
Oh. Can you say more? How big is the team right now, and how are you organized?
It's 12 people full time, but we have a number of, like you said, advisors, consultants, contractors that come in, and we can kind of pull from the early days of Tesla. It's a kind of a secret sauce we have. It's like, oh man, I remember this person that did this really good thing at Tesla 20 years ago. We called them on the phone. Like literally, we have like somebody downstairs right now that set up the entire service department for Tesla. We're like, hey, like we've got this challenge. We kind of need a hand. We're like, all right, I'll be there tomorrow. Like I'll get an Airbnb. I'll stay for a week. Like that happens a lot more than you'd expect in our company.
Very cool. Well, you can always share. As I shared before, we have a tracking document. If you have open positions and looking for talent, let us know. I see a question in the chat from Terry. In general, what are your thoughts about EV startups partnering with the big auto companies or getting funding from these major corporations?
Yeah. So we look at this like CVC, corporate venture capital. That's oftentimes how we bucket that in. There was a wave of corporate venture capital that happened for the EV startups, like Mercedes invested in Telo, Ford or Fontanalis invested in Rivian, Amazon's invested in Zoox and Rivian as well. So we've seen a lot of that come, but we've also seen a lot of those CVCs get burnt in that kind of direction with some of the companies that came and maybe failed in that space. Magna's big investment into Fisker turned out not to be a super strategic thing. So there's a lot of actually trepidation around the big automotive companies and uncertainty of what's going on. They're feeling the heat of the political climate a lot more than the startups are feeling. So they have a lot more trepidation around that. I think as an EV company, our big pursuits have been through climate investors and generalist investors that want to make this contrarian bet because they believe what we're doing is so important in this space.
That makes sense. Chris is asking, there are a lot of expectations around what a truck is. Telo is both visibly and philosophically very different. How has that hurt or helped so far?
So I think that you actually mentioned that article in Inc. That was awesome, right? They have these little how tiny trucks are new dude magnets. So it's funny. We kind of like rode this wave kind of really well in a timing perspective where Japanese K trucks and small trucks are kind of making a resurgence and people are super excited about that. They're fed up with the fact that you can't see over the hood of a giant truck, that kids are dying and like zero kids got ran over in their driveway in 2005 and something like 500 did last year, like something insane number of this. Like the pedestrian deaths are at an all-time high. Like people are getting tired of this and they're starting to feel that. And so I think that, it's kind of a refreshing view. But a lot of times people go, oh, but this doesn't do that. This doesn't do this. And this has been true of like the loss leading, like tiny electric vehicles, the smart cars, the Chevy Sparks, the Fiat 500. People have often gone, oh, it doesn't have the range, doesn't have the power, it doesn't have enough room, it can't do this. So we wanted to kind of take all that away as much as possible. It seats 5 with as much leg and headroom as my Tacoma. It has a 5-foot bed. That could be an 8-foot bed if you fold the seats down flat. It's got 500 horsepower. It's got 350 miles of range. Like, you don't have the argument why not to do it anymore. Now you're just going to do it.
Desirable. Nick is asking, curious what your strategies for sales, service distribution nationally and internationally. We found that the vehicle itself is only the most visible part of the ownership experience, and you need to deliver on the whole ecosystem. Great question.
Yeah. This is extremely important, especially when we talk about it with both our early customers and our investors as well. So there's a lot of things that haven't worked over the time. Like, people are really fed up with a lot of the old school dealership networks. People are also actually not realizing it, but some of the direct to consumers has caused a lot of issues in the electric vehicle space. For example, if you contract manufacture your vehicle and you have a direct to consumer business model, what happens is the second your vehicle's done with contract manufacturing, you have to outright buy that vehicle. And then you own that vehicle. It sits on your inventory. If you don't turn it around immediately, then it's just something that's an asset on your books. And if that happens 1,000 times in a very short period of time, that could bankrupt your company. And we've seen that at least once before. So we are trying to do the right thing where we work with third-party distribution and service centers for the first batch of our vehicles until we have enough volume of vehicles, volume of service centers where we can do direct to consumer. So this is not saying we're going to work with traditional dealership networks. This is more like the United Rental type companies of the world that can do this distribution, that have the mechanisms in place that can finance these things without us having to necessarily own all that outright. And it's called a hybrid model. It's relatively new in the automotive space, but a lot of automakers are looking towards that directly, especially when they look at commercial customers, because it's a way that they can have very little downtime by working directly with a third party as opposed to having to wait for the OEM to help them out. Now, internationally, I don't have a great answer for that, because our main strategy is get to 5,000 vehicles first domestically. And then when we get there, we're going to go big, but we want to hit that crossover index first.
Yes. Plus Europe, I feel like, has a lot of homologation and things.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, that actually is like really, really true. So the US has a unique set of rules for getting vehicles on the road where you self-certify. So you do all the testing yourself, and you effectively say, I've done it. Here's all the paperwork. And the government looks at it and says, yep, you filled out all the paperwork. You're good to go. Now, in Europe, it's much more like the FDA, where they read all the documents and they say, oh, you didn't do this thing perfectly. Like, you have to go explain why you didn't do it perfectly. And that process takes a lot longer. It's a lot more expensive. And it leaves the door open for a lot more scrutiny on each of the things you do. So that's a trade-off, and we will eventually get there. We're building our vehicle. We have regulatory advisors that help us make sure that we're not doing anything that would directly make it impossible for us to sell our vehicle in Europe. It's just going to be a longer.
Right. So just wanted to ask the question for you, Jason. How can this community help you? We have a lot of talented people, connections, anything we can do for you?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing you guys can do is, if you love the Telo vehicle, order one. So it's a refundable deposit, $152 for $1 for every inch the vehicle is long. But other than that, we are going to go through a fundraising cycle ourselves, and post fundraising cycle, we're going to be about double to tripling our team. So this will be very, very interesting for us. We're always looking for talented engineers, operations leaders that can really help us execute on our strategy.
And is your team remote or in person?
So we are mostly in person because there's so much camaraderie and enthusiasm, and we're building a vehicle with our hands. But there's certain roles where we are certainly open to being remote.
Wonderful. So number one, check the website for pre-order page. And then 2, we'll relay any open position you may have in the future and make sure this community can help you. And hopefully we'll see you also at SF Climate Week. Thank you so much. That was so much fun, Jason. And thank you for lifting the veil and telling us a little bit about your operating secrets and how the company is functioning, because I feel like there's so much that we can share with this group and help everybody be successful, speed a little bit up, and be ready for more climate adventures. So thanks everyone who's just saying hi and bye in the chat. It was really wonderful, and have a great day, everybody. Thanks, Jason. Bye.